And you've got a busy day, Cabinet Secretary, you've been at committee, you've been in a statement, now you've got more questions. We now move on to portfolio questions on rural economy and tourism. Question number 1, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to tourism businesses in the West Scotland region in light of the current COVID-19 restrictions.
And before you answer, Cabinet Secretary, remind members if they want a supplementary put R in the chat function. Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government recognises the difficulties facing businesses across Scotland, and whilst necessary, the restrictions have had a devastating impact on the sector. We have allocated almost £3 billion to support businesses. I announced a package of support worth £104 million for tourism and hospitality businesses, developed following many discussions with industry. The rollout of these funds is underway. Many tourism businesses in Scotland can also obtain regular support through the Strategic Framework Business Fund. On 11th January, we announced top-up grants worth up to £25,000 for larger premises, and we continue, Presiding Officer, to assess what more can be done to support individual sectors.
Before I take Mary Fee again, can I say to members, putting R in the chat function, you have to make it clear it's a supplementary to that which question, because it could be anything. And now, Mary Fee, please.
Thank you. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? The £104.3 million of support will help many tourism and hospitality businesses in my region. But can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what support, financial or otherwise, is available to businesses in the tourism and hospitality supply chain that primarily rely on this sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I think Mary Fee makes a very reasonable point, and it's one that we've worked on long and hard. And yes, there are elements of the supply chain that are also dependent or largely dependent upon tourism and hospitality, and in particular the wholesale sector springs to mind. And I have worked long and hard with representatives of the wholesale sector to ensure that they are not left out. Presiding Officer, my task is to get lifeline support out to those that need it, and this is a task we haven't completed, and I'm determined that we should continue to do it and reach out to businesses that have been impacted but haven't had help. That's absolutely imperative, and I'm determined to carry on doing that task for as long as this COVID crisis is upon us.
Question 2, Maurice Corrie.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what support it plans to provide to the tourism industry in the light of the uncertainty that businesses face in their decision-making process for this year's summer season.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I agree that the restrictions will continue to have a devastating impact on our hospitality and tourism sectors, but of course they are vital in suppressing the virus transmission. As our efforts to tackle the virus progress, we will continue to build on our very constructive dialogue with industry and listen to their concerns as we move towards recovery. And indeed, this was one of the key recommendations from the Tourism Recovery Task Force report.
Maurice Corrie. Maurice, you're muted. Don't know why.
Oh, right. Sorry, that's.
I can hear you now.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, and I welcome the long-called-for announcement last December of the Scottish Government's funding package for the tourism and hospitality industry, which is to include a sorely needed outdoor tourism restart fund. And indeed, outdoor and marine tourism businesses along the Firth of Clyde in my region desperately need a sustained support to recover and rebuild their services, such as the function and renovation of their piers, for example. What progress is the Cabinet Secretary looking to do with Scottish Government in cooperating with tourism bodies in detailed funding criteria, in producing detailed funding criteria and a rollout plan which will help the marine businesses like those in my West Scotland region to remain viable long-term, especially given the challenges they face in an ongoing lockdown?
Cabinet Secretary, can I have shorter questions, please, and shorter answers?
Well, we're working very closely with stakeholders, the Tourism Alliance, with Sail Scotland. We're working with marine tourism interests, and I have met them and continue to do so. So we are engaging actively, to answer the member's question, with the marine sector. I absolutely agree that it's an extremely important and growing and varied part of the tourism offering in Scotland and hugely attractive to many throughout the world. So I undertake that we will continue that work and do our very best to support the sector through this COVID crisis.
Brief supplementaries from Richard Lyle, then Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, President. So the Cabinet Secretary mentioned some of the responses to Scottish Tourism Recovery Task Force recommendations. What engagement has the Scottish Government had with the UK Government regarding some of the long-term recommendations made by the task force?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I have regular engagement with the UK and the Welsh and Northern Irish tourism ministers. Nigel Huddleston and I have a good working relationship, I think. I've made it clear that I felt that the furlough should have been extended from October, and it was, and then to April. I fear that the furlough, as we heard in the Tourism Committee this morning, doesn't offer quite sufficient support to hotels and major employers in particular. And I do think the case for extending the VAT relief period is very, very strong. And I will be putting these points in my next meeting with Mr. Huddleston, which I believe is on the 28th of January.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Marine tourism misses out because boats don't have rateable values. I understand some funding has been announced and this is welcome, but it has not yet opened, and discretionary funding that is available to local authorities is also failing to meet those desperately in need. They can't wait any longer. These businesses will fail if they don't get funding immediately. What can the Cabinet Secretary do to give them immediate help so those marine businesses?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, it's absolutely correct to say that many businesses are facing real financial pressure. And that's why we have sought to provide support for many sectors, including marine, that face real difficulties. And some areas of activity, such as taxi drivers and the coach sector, the hotel fund, the Pivotal Enterprise Fund, are all support that I don't think has been replicated down south in England. So we have gone an extra mile for some, but I absolutely accept that the speed of dispatch of funds is extremely important. And myself and my officials are working, frankly, every day and sometimes night in order to finalise the schemes, working with industry and get money out to people that need them. That's the absolute priority, Presiding Officer.
Question 3, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it's had with the UK Government regarding the recommendations of Lord Bugh's Agriculture Funding Review.
Cabinet Secretary.
In September 2019, I welcomed the UK Government's acceptance of the recommendations and wider observations of the Lord Bugh Review. This came after 5 years campaigning by this Government and Parliament for the UK Government to right this historic wrong. In response to the Bugh Review, the UK Government welcomed the principle of uplift for less productive land and that collective engagement with the devolved governments should take place on future funding. Disappointingly, Presiding Officer, no such meaningful engagement has taken place. Instead, indeed, it's taken persistent pressure from myself, alongside ministers in devolved governments, to receive the commitment in November to such engagement from the DEFRA Secretary. The UK Government is causing considerable uncertainty to the sum of 77.1 million through to 25 by not committing to nor even opening dialogue on the future of Bugh money. So this sum is not in isolation, it's part of the £170 million that Scottish producers and rural communities are set to miss out on through to 2025.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. And does he agree that we simply cannot trust the Tories to do right by rural Scotland? What impact would the loss of the Bugh Review funding have on our farmers and crofters, and where does it leave Scotland in comparison to other UK nations in terms of payment rates for farming and crofting?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the cut by the UK of 170.1 million is just devastating. Incidentally, it wasn't even made, a decision wasn't even made to ministers in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It was communicated at a meeting of officials in September. This is a disgraceful decision. Michael Gove and George Eustace promised that if we got out of the EU with Brexit, there would be no reduction. Indeed, there would be an increase. The funding would be at least matched. That promise has been broken. The Tories have broken their promise to Scotland, and we can never trust them again.
Question 4, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government to expand on the discussions it's had with the UK Government regarding the continued operation of VAT-free shopping for international tourists visiting Scotland.
Yes, it's not quite as is down on the bulletin paper, but close enough. I'll let you away with it. Cabinet Secretary.
Despite the serious implications for travel, tourism and retail, there was no prior engagement with the Scottish Government or the UK Government in this matter. On the 22nd of October, the Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Fair Work and Culture and Cabinet Secretary for Finance sent a joint letter to the UK Chancellor expressing our opposition to the change and requesting a review as soon as possible, and we'll continue to press the UK Government in this matter. And we believe it's important these sectors receive the support they need to weather the difficulties they face and the further challenges to come thanks to Brexit, and don't believe that this is at all the appropriate juncture at which to make such an abrupt and significant change.
Rona Mackay, please.
Thank you. Our retail and aviation sectors need all the support they can get in the midst of this global pandemic. Given that the VAT-free schemes play a critical role in helping this sector to create jobs and help businesses thrive, will the Cabinet Secretary call on the UK Government to see sense and maintain these crucial schemes to protect thousands of jobs from being lost and to prevent businesses from going under?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, yes, I will, and I will do so when I meet Nigel Huddleston on the 28th September, next Thursday, and I'm grateful to Rona Mackay for raising this in the Scottish Parliament. And could I just say that, you know, the international sector in tourism is the least likely to emerge from COVID rapidly. It's the most affected, and surely VAT-free shopping is something that brings people, or is a factor that helps to bring people into international custom and visitation. And therefore, to cut that is really cutting their feet from international tourism at a time when they're on their uppers. It really seemed to me to be a particularly callous and ill-chosen decision. That's why the Scottish Government has resisted it, and I'll raise it, thanks to Rona Mackay raising this now, next week with Nigel.
Question 5, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support it has provided to businesses in the food and drink sector whose operations have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, since the start of the pandemic, our support for business and the economy totals almost £3 billion, demonstrating our commitment to supporting the economy and providing as much financial support to affected businesses, including food and drink. And we've also supported bespoke food and drink sectors, the food and drink wholesalers, £5.4 million to 40 businesses, and seafood processors, £5.8 million to 132 businesses who've been hit very hard. So we need to continue to provide help as we strive to balance our effort to suppress the virus against the impact on business.
Bill Kidd.
Thank you, and thank the Cabinet Secretary for that. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that there are many Glasgow-based businesses involved in the fishing and seafood sectors, including hauliers, and that the problems with exports reaches very far into the economy. Will the UK's compensation scheme help everyone being affected by the chaos caused by the Tories' Brexit?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, no, and it is emerging that the schemes, the compensation scheme, will only actually benefit a few, and there will be quite high hurdles. And therefore, I think many people, many businesses that have been really hit very hard in the seafood sector over the past 3 weeks will be absolutely spitting with rage when they find out that the promise by the First Minister will exclude them. He promised them El Dorado, but they're looking at insolvency instead.
And 2 brief supplementaries. First, Colin Smith, followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, President Officer. Cabinet Secretary, last year ahead of stage 3 of the Agriculture Bill, you announced that you were, and I quote, beginning a process of developing a non-statutory statement of policy on food. Your argument was it was a better alternative, as might call, for a statutory national food plan because it didn't need legislation. But Cabinet Secretary, 5 months on, can you tell us what the timetable is to deliver that statement of food policy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we're working on that at the moment, and I can come back to Mr. Smith with a more detailed answer. But I would respectfully point out that we are in the middle of not just one, but two crises, a COVID crisis and a Brexit crisis. And quite frankly, my focus is in trying to help on a day-to-day basis, businesses that face going under, people that face losing their livelihoods, businesses that are being crippled by Brexit. So forgive me, but that's where I'm spending my time and doing my work every day, all day.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Many food and drink businesses will have scaled up or indeed embarked on online operations. My colleague Beatrice Wishart raised with the Cabinet Secretary earlier this morning the importance of reopening the Digital Boost scheme. But can the Cabinet Secretary advise what support may be available to food and drink businesses to improve packaging, distribution and other aspects that will allow them to take advantage of those opportunities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think Mr. MacArthur raises a very important point, and one which again has been exacerbated by the Brexit difficulties, because that will have a significant impact on things like labelling, requiring additional cost, additional labels, altered labels, different labels for different markets. And therefore, in the light of this, we will have to reconsider whether there's more that we can do. But of course, Presiding Officer, the assistance in these matters in partly came from the food and drink financial support from the EU. And that support has effectively been massively reduced and cut by the UK government by £170 million. So our scope for action in this out of the EU is far, far reduced as opposed to what it was when we were a member of the EU.
Question 6, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the impact of Brexit on the salmon industry.
Cabinet Secretary.
Just as warned, Brexit is having a devastating immediate impact on the farm fish sector, particularly salmon. The Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation has estimated that the industry's losses since 1st of January are several £million. This is due to salmon being stuck in transit and the inability to fulfil orders on time, the lack of groupage facilities hampering some smaller producers, cancelled harvests and lost customers are also adding to the impact, with the drop in spot prices for delayed and unreliable Scottish orders, making Norwegian salmon more competitive.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his very worrying response, and he will of course be well aware of my constituency interest, given Mowi has a salmon processing plant in Rosyth employing over 600 workers. Can the Cabinet Secretary clarify whether it can really be the case that the rotten Brexit deal negotiated by the UK Tory government enmeshes for the first time the future of Scotland's aquaculture industry with the outcome of subsequent fisheries negotiations, tariffs therefore not being able to be ruled out?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, that is correct. The trade agreement negotiated by the UK is such that if the EU don't, at the expiry of the 5-year period, obtain a rollover or a deal satisfactory to them, then they are quite entitled to impose tariffs to the level of their estimated loss in fishing effort as a result. This would see tariffs imposed on aquaculture, which of course has nothing to do with the common fisheries policy and entirely separate. And therefore the aquaculture industry is going to be punished for something completely separate and apart from it. This is an astonishing provision to agree. It is completely irrelevant. It is utterly unjustified, and it's appalling. And just another example of how this Brexit deal, Presiding Officer, badly let Scotland down. But I'm not really sure if in Whitehall they know very much about Scotland's aquaculture industry, and decisions like this certainly prove that that must be true.
Question 7, Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the gene editing of crop varieties in order to deliver greater food production and achieve environmental targets.
Minister Ben McPherson.
The Scottish Government's policy on the cultivation of GM crops has not changed. We will be maintaining Scotland's GM-free crop status in line with our commitment to seek alignment with high EU standards, and we have made our views known to you. We also await the result of the forthcoming study of the decision made by the European Court of Justice in 2018 that gene editing falls under the GMO legislation. This is the proportionate and appropriate approach to take.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank the Minister for that answer. At the Oxford Farming Conference last year, Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing said that the Scottish Government would not comment until the EU had considered the prevailing EU Court of Justice ruling that the gene editing could be considered in the same way as genetically modified. We know that gene editing reduces the need for application of pesticides, which in turn would help the Scottish Government's poor biodiversity targets and help the agri-sector meet climate change targets. Is the Minister and his SNP government seriously going to disadvantage Scottish farmers and the environment if England were to approve gene editing by holding Scotland back based on outdated EU decision?
Minister.
Firstly, it's important to emphasise that the Scottish Government's position on the cultivation of gene-edited crops remains precautionary. And as I said, that's in line with our commitment to seek alignment with high EU standards when it's in Scotland's best interests and it is appropriate to do so. I should also emphasise that we have long been opposed to the cultivation of GM crops in the open environment in order to protect the clean green status of Scotland's 14.8 billion food and drink sector. And I think it's important to consider that part of what makes Scottish produce so attractive to consumers in Scotland, in the UK and around the world is that clean green status. And we should bear that in mind. If I may, Presiding Officer, I think it's important also to emphasise that the UK Government's decision to consult on making changes to the definition of GMO, which would differ to Scotland's approach, is an example of why we believe that the UK Internal Market Act removes our competency to make decisions on the marketing of products in a devolved area. And it's concerning that while any definition change outlined in their consultation would not in legal terms extend to Scotland, the UK Internal Market Act would force Scotland to accept the marketing, sale and free circulation of products in Scotland which do not meet the standards set out in the Scottish regulations. So there is much to be concerned about, but as I said, the Scottish Government will continue to take a precautionary approach.
And question 8, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent meetings it has had with representatives of the tourism industry and what was discussed.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government meets weekly with the sector to discuss a range of issues, including the impacts of COVID restrictions, the need for continued business support and the routes to recovery. At my most recent meeting of the 13th of January, I met with the Scottish Tourism Alliance to discuss details of the new £185 million business support package and also to hear progress of the new Tourism and Hospitality Talent Development Programme.
John Scott.
I thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but he will know that tourism businesses like coach operators and visitor attractions have been waiting for months for support. Last week, COSLA suggested that support announced in December may not arrive till February or March, and if this is the case, what is causing the delay and when will these funds be paid out to struggling businesses?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would expect in the case of the coach sector and most others that payments will be made following the application process which has been launched either this month or in February, and that payments will be made as swiftly thereafter. And Mr. Scott raises an extremely important point to me. We must make sure that we can get this money out as quickly as possible. We must be careful to use public money carefully, however, and avoid any wrong payments. And finally, could I say that the payment to coaches has been made in Scotland. This was after I asked the UK Government to have a UK scheme, given that coaches travel across the border and work on a pan-UK basis. The UK declined to do that, so that's why we're going ahead with the Scottish scheme for compensating coach operators, because they are an essential and quality part of the tourism offering in Scotland.
Thank you. That concludes questions on the rural economy and tourism. It's time to move on to the next set of portfolio questions, which my colleague will be taking over. I hand over to Ms. Fardiani.
And the next portfolio is transport, infrastructure and connectivity. Can I ask those members who wish to request a supplementary question to indicate in the chat function by entering the letter R during the relevant question. And question number 1 is from Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Scottish Government how it plans to redirect investment from unsustainable modes of transport and into modes that are considered more sustainable, including rail infrastructure?
Michael Matheson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are investing over £1 billion on bus priority and active travel infrastructure. We're also providing over £1 billion supporting public transport provision every year. And over the course of the pandemic have committed some £692 million of additional support. Since 2007, we've invested over £9 billion on rail infrastructure and continue to invest record levels in this control period, including our commitment to decarbonise the network by 2035. Decisions on future transport investments will be made through the second Strategic Transport Projects Review and will prioritise investment in line with the Sustainable Investment Hierarchy.
Patrick Harvey.
Grateful for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary may have seen the report the Scottish Greens published recently called Rail for All, which, amongst many other recommendations, calls for a streamlining of the Scottish Transport Appraisal Guidance, the STAG process, which is extremely complex, time-consuming, costly, and places a barrier on rail development. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this process needs to be reduced and aligned behind the overarching aim of rapidly delivering low-carbon transport infrastructure, and that this change should begin immediately?
Michael Matheson.
I am aware of the report that Mr Harvey makes reference to, which raises a number of very interesting suggestions and is one of the things that we will take into account as we go forward in making our decisions around STPR2. What I can say to the member is that within our National Transport Strategy that was published just last year, we set out a clear commitment to review the STAG process. I'm conscious that there are some issues around the length of time it takes and also the costs which are associated with a STAG appraisal. And for that reason, we've already given a commitment that we will carry out that review over the course of the next couple of years. What I should say to the member, though, is that he will recognise that it is extremely important that before we undertake any major transport investment, that we have an assurance that it will deliver the intentions which are behind that particular scheme. And that's why the STAG appraisal system is important, but I do recognise the need for reform and change of it is important, and that's why we've made a commitment to do so.
Question number 2, Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made with dualling the A75.
Michael Matheson.
The South West Scotland Transport Study, published in January 2020, includes the option for targeted improvements on the A75 within its recommendations, including some partial dualling. This is subject to more detailed appraisal within the second Strategic Transport Projects Review. The study emphasises the importance of a connected, safe, resilient and high-quality strategic transport network for South West Scotland, and found that targeted improvements rather than full dualling was more proportionate in meeting both the regional transport objectives and the sustainable investment hierarchy set out in the National Transport Strategy.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but after 14 years of SNP inaction, do they not believe that my constituents deserve better? And can he explain to them why he was unwilling to take part in the Union Connectivity Review, which has the potential to boost the case for improvements to this vital route?
Michael Matheson.
Let me deal with both the parts that the member has raised. The first part is that it's wrong to suggest that there has been no action taken by the SNP government, because we've just completed the South West Scotland Transport Corridor Study, which identifies areas for wider modal improvement, not just road, but wider modal improvement within the South West of Scotland. And that's now feeding into the second Strategic Transport Project Review, which will be published this year, setting out the priorities on how we will take forward investments right across the country, including within South West Scotland. The Union Connectivity Review has no relevance to the investment in the A75 because it's a devolved matter and it's a matter which is within the responsibility of the Scottish Government. Equally, the member will also recognise that the Union Connectivity Review was set up without any consultation or engagement with the devolved governments across the whole of the UK. And the Northern Irish and Welsh Government, just like the Scottish Government, have all raised very serious concerns about that. This is nothing more than a blatant power grab by the UK Government, seeking to undermine the devolved competence of the Scottish Parliament. And I would have thought, as a Conservative, that you would want to stand up for the people of Scotland and make sure that your constituents get the type of investment which is necessary, rather than actually signing up to a political agenda which is being pushed by his colleagues at Westminster.
Short supplementary, please, from Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. The challenges of Brexit highlight more than ever how vital the A75 and A77 are as direct routes to the ferry ports at Cairnryan. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us specifically to what extent he'll take into account the increased economic importance of keeping Cairnryan competitive when it comes to allocating what he's made clear is likely to be a smaller budget for road infrastructure?
Michael Matheson.
Well, the member does raise an important point around the importance, the strategic importance of Cairnryan, and these are key factors which will be considered as part of the STPR2 process and looking at potential modal improvements both to road and also to rail for the southwest of Scotland. But he also makes reference to an important point, and that is the fact that the UK Government have just cut our capital budget by 5%. That will have consequences not just for transport but also for wider capital investment right across the whole of the Scottish Government and therefore right across the whole of Scotland. But you can be assured that the issue of the importance of the strategic importance of Cairnryan will be a key factor which will be taken into account in determining investment for the southwest of Scotland as part of the STPR2 process.
Question number 3, Claire Baker.
To ask the Scottish Government what action is being taken to reduce the impact of any closures of the Queensferry crossing.
Michael Matheson.
When there is a risk that the Queensferry crossing may have to close due to ice accretions, then our operating company, BEAR Scotland, will be alerted in advance. Our 5-point plan is then implemented, which includes enhanced patrols, heightened focus on prevailing weather conditions, increased data and intelligence gathering, and pre-laying of traffic management and enhancing stakeholder communications. During any emergency closure of the Queensferry crossing, a diversion route will be implemented using the Forth Road Bridge or the Kincardine Bridge as appropriate, depending on the duration of the closure required. As you'll be aware, the Queensferry crossing was closed this morning at approximately 4:30. The northbound carriageway reopened at approximately 9:15 and the southbound carriageway at 10:20. The closure followed forecasts predicting a high risk of ice accretions between 5 and 7 AM this morning. 5-point plan was implemented successfully. Due to the forecasting of a short duration during the course of this morning's disruption, traffic was diverted via Kincardine in accordance with the established procedure.
Claire Baker.
As the Cabinet Secretary has recognised, the bridge was closed overnight and earlier this morning, and this causes significant delays and diversion for those who are travelling. And can I ask what cost assessment was made of the ice prevention system as considered as part of the construction plans for the Queensferry crossing, and why it was decided not to take this forward?
Michael Matheson.
I don't have the precise figure to hand, Presiding Officer, but more than happy to write to Claire Baker with further information on the actual costs which would be associated with that, because that was part of the original design programme. What I can say to her is that the reason it was not progressed is because it was identified as being a low risk of being a problem on the new Queensferry crossing, given the history of the site and also the weather forecasting within the air over an extended period of time. But clearly it continues to be an ongoing issue, which is why we've enhanced the arrangements we have for managing these matters to try and minimise the disruption which is caused to her constituents, which is always very regrettable. We shall also recognise that the bridge is much more reliable than what we had with the Forth Road Bridge, which was regularly closed due to high winds, which is not the case with the Queensferry crossing. But you can also be assured that we are continuing to look to try and identify measures that could help to minimise the risk yet further of disruption on the Queensferry crossing associated with these specific conditions that result in ice accretions. So the member can be assured we'll continue to do everything we can to try and minimise the risks and the problems which occur as a result of this type of disruption.
Short supplementaries and answers, please, from Graham Simpson and then Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what measures he is looking at to prevent further closures of the Queensferry crossing? Because it's getting immensely frustrating the number of times it is closed.
Michael Matheson.
Well, I think, and I recognise the frustration. However, having said that, I think it's now something in the region of about 3 or 4 occasions where this has occurred. Or was it a problem during the construction phase, and also it is only within specific weather conditions that the problem occurs. So, for example, during periods such as the Peaceful East, it was not a problem on the bridge itself. They're looking at a range of different options, potentially involving ultrasound and also a vibration system that may be an appropriate means by which to address it. However, any system has to be designed on a bespoke basis for a bridge, because the member may be aware that this is a problem which has occurred in similar bridges across the world and in other parts of the UK, and any system would have to be designed on a bespoke basis to actually meet the perimeters of the Queensferry crossing itself.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much. The reason that Kincardine was favoured this morning is because I was told in a helpful briefing from Scotland that it takes 5 hours to put in the necessary contraflow signage and road changes to open up the FRB as a resilience. Given that the ice sensors on the bridge have been warning of ice accretion almost every day since Christmas, this is likely to be more regular. So can I ask what can be done to reduce the amount of time it takes to get the FRB stood up as a resilience measure? And will the government commit the capital funding necessary to mitigating a permanent solution on the bridge?
Michael Matheson.
So the specific points that Mr Cole-Hamilton has raised, I can give him a commitment that we are committed to trying to identify a long-term solution to this particular issue, and research is ongoing to try and make sure that we get a system that can help to address this problem on an ongoing basis. In relation to the timescale it takes to implement the diversion, he is correct. There's a further exercise being taken forward by BEAR Scotland in the coming weeks in order to try and look at reducing that time frame. But the member will recognise that if the diversion was implemented in every occasion when it was thought it could be a risk, then it would cause significant disruption. So there's a fine balance to be reached here in making these judgments, and the ongoing work that BEAR Scotland are taking forward and the further work that we are taking forward in terms of research in this area will help to inform how we can help to manage this issue more effectively as we go forward.
Question number 4 was not lodged. Question number 5, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what additional support is being provided to protect frontline public transport staff during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Michael Matheson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since the pandemic started, Transport Scotland has provided guidance to transport operators to keep both staff and passengers safe. This guidance was produced in consultation with operators, COSLA, regional transport partnerships, passenger groups and trade unions, and is subject to ongoing review. The cornerstone of the guidance is the emphasis is on the importance of undertaking a robust and ongoing risk-based assessment with full input from trade unions, and then keeping all risk mitigation measures under regular review so that transport facilities, vehicles and vessels continue to feel and be safe for staff and passengers.
Anna Sarwar.
Thank you so much, Cabinet Secretary. Clearly there are ongoing conversations and guidelines around COVID-19 protections, which is welcome, but I have heard concerns from staff members about added risks of threats, violence and abuse on our public transport system, given that there are less people on board and people feeling more vulnerable as a result. What public information campaign can be done? What further support can be given to make sure we're protecting our public transport staff, not just from the COVID-19, but from threats and abuse at work?
Michael Matheson.
Then also, our frontline staff in the transport sector in Scotland during the course of this pandemic have been outstanding in their commitment to maintaining public transport and ensuring that key workers and others are able to get to their points of work during the course of what has been a very challenging time. Mr Sarwar raises an important issue, and there have been reports of increasing levels of abuse being experienced by some within the transport sector, particularly when they're seeking to try and enforce issues around social distancing and wearing face coverings. No worker should face any form of abuse during the course of their work, and I would condemn any form of violence or inappropriate language which has been used towards transport workers during the course of their duties. We have engaged with both Police Scotland and also with British Transport Police to look at what further action could be taken to help to address this particular issue. And I can assure the member that British Transport Police in particular are very proactive in pursuing issues where there are problems being identified across the transport network, and we will continue to work with them to support them in our important work in addressing this issue.
A quick supplementary, please, from Alex Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've been contacted by constituents who have had to use buses in order for essential shopping and have found that a number of people on the buses are ignoring the need to use face coverings. Given the last question, what needs to be done to ensure the safety of people using the buses and people refusing to wear safe coverings?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, the way in which the system operates at the present moment is that operators are required to have prominent signage and information encouraging those who are making use of buses to wear a face covering, and what the rules are while they are using their transport during the course of the pandemic. We've also provided them with support around communications that they can help to, they can expand and they can use within their own network to encourage service users to make sure they're using face coverings. But equally, we all have a collective responsibility to play our part in helping to reduce the spread of this virus across our communities, and face coverings have an important part to play on that. Ultimately, enforcement is a matter for Police Scotland when it comes to buses, and if there is a persistent problem which Mr Royal is experiencing on particular routes within his constituency, he should engage with the operator and also potentially with Police Scotland if it becomes a persistent issue.
Question number 6, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when soundproofing fencing will be erected on the Uddingston section of the M74.
Michael Matheson.
My officials are continuing to press Scottish Road Partnership for details on how it will deliver its obligations under the contract. Scottish Road Partnerships is currently considering how best to address this matter, and therefore the programme for mitigation measures that may be required is unknown at this stage. This is a subject that requires detailed specialist input, and my officials have sought independent specialist advice to aid resolution of these issues in discussions with Scottish Road Partnerships.
Richard Lyle.
Cabinet Secretary, you know this has been an issue which I've pressed for over the last number of years, and I will continue to press until I retire. My constituents were promised soundproof fencing if noise levels increased. Noise levels have increased as per recent surveys. So what steps is the Government taking to press SRP to ensure that these promises are kept?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I recognise that this is a long-standing issue which Richard Lyle has pursued very vigorously on behalf of his constituents. In order to try and make sure we make further progress with this issue, my officials have sought independent specialist advice on the noise assessment which was undertaken by Scottish Road Partnerships. And I can assure Mr Lyle that this will be used to ensure that the necessary suitable mitigation measures that are required to be taken forward by the contractor, and it is contractually obliged to do so, will be implemented. And this specialist advice will assist us in making sure that progress is made with this matter.
Question number 7, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government when the Edinburgh to Perth railway line will be upgraded.
Michael Matheson.
Record levels of investment continue to be made on the rail network in this control period, including the routes linking Edinburgh and Perth. Improvements already include electrification from Edinburgh to Dunblane, the new Blackford freight terminal, and the new high-quality intercity intercity service. Scottish ministers are committed to ensuring the railway meets future growth needs for passengers and freight. For example, work to implement the Rail Decarbonisation Action Plan includes consideration of electrification options for the routes to Perth.
Liz Smith.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but he knows that in relation to the green recovery and addressing climate change, Scottish Government's own experts have advised that infrastructure development and greener transport are absolutely essential. And he knows too that the timescale for a journey between Perth and Edinburgh is exactly the same as it was 100 years ago. So can I ask just what priority the Scottish Government is putting on this railway and on the exact timescale for any changes that are actually going to be made to improve things?
Michael Matheson.
Well, the member should be aware that we're actually investing record amounts during Control Period 6 into our railway, and we're the first part of the UK to commit to decarbonising our rail network by 2035. That will involve significant investment in electrification, but also in new rolling stock, which is zero carbon emitting. All of that investment is a very significant recognition of the importance that rail has in helping to achieve our climate change objectives. Specifically on the line between Perth and Edinburgh, as I mentioned, we've already electrified to Dunblane, and we are considering the potential for further electrification, which delivers faster services and also can increase capacity on the route network as well. Alongside that, we're also looking at improving the existing signalling system and also the timetable, which again would help to improve journey times between Edinburgh and Perth.
And question number 8 is Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the next evaluation will be carried out of the M8, M73, M74 motorway improvement project in line with the Scottish Trunk Road Infrastructure Project evaluation guidance.
Michael Matheson. Mr Matheson, you appear to be on mute. Could you start your answer again? I think we've got you now.
Sorry, Presiding Officer. Transport Scotland has undertaken a 1-year after opening evaluation of the M8, M73, M74 motorway improvement projects in line with their guidance. The evaluation report will be published shortly after a technical review has been completed. This evaluation requires extensive data collection and analysis given the scale and impact of this project to ensure the robustness of the evaluation.
Margaret Mitchell.
And flooding.
Oh, no, excuse me, Ms Mitchell. We had an issue with you as well. If you could start your question again.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Surface water and flooding during heavy rain continue to be a worrying issue on large parts of the upgraded M8. There have been countless gantry warnings to drivers to take extra care, and/or speed restrictions have been put in place to control traffic on roads made hazardous by this surface water. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm what's been done to address this dangerous issue and make it safer for drivers in wet road conditions, and if drainage has been identified as a problem, perhaps resulting from rubble during the upgrade of the project?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the important safety issue that Margaret Mitchell has raised. I'm not aware of any specific problems on this particular area of the M8 or the M73 or M74. However, what I will do is I'll ask officials to engage with the trunk operating companies to ensure that if there is a particular problem, that issue is addressed. Additionally, if Margaret Mitchell has some specific details of sections of the road where she believes this is a problem, I'd be more than happy to ensure that officials pick up on that and that we ensure that it's properly investigated.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes portfolio questions on transport infrastructure and connectivity, and we will move on to the next portfolio with my colleague.
Thank you. The final portfolio is Justice and Law Officers. I remind members that questions 2 and 6 have been grouped together, and I will take any supplementaries on these questions after both of these questions have been answered. If a member wishes to ask a supplementary question, they should indicate in the chat function by entering letter R, but do this during the relevant question, please. Question number 1, Shona Robinson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what the impact will be on security and safety in Scotland of no longer having access to EU security protocols and law enforcement organisations, including the European Arrest Warrant, Europol and Eurojust.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
The impact will be significant. Police Scotland and the Crown Office now have to use slower and frankly less effective tools under the new than they had before. Key impacts are loss of access to the SIS2 database. That means that Police Scotland will no longer have access to real-time or immediate alerts from EU partners on wanted or missing persons, and also, of course, the loss of the European Arrest Warrant, as the new system allows EU member states to refuse to extradite their own nationals to Scotland. Bringing someone to face justice in Scotland will also likely take longer and cost more than it would have EU member state. While the deal enables some cooperation with Europol and Eurojust, it is still less than, of course, what we had with full EU membership. The only ones, very frankly, who will benefit from this loss of capability is, unfortunately, those who commit crime.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I'm finding your sound quite quiet. I don't know if it's just me or if it's the same for all members, but I'll ask Ms Robinson if she was able to hear that all clearly. Shona Robinson.
Yes, I was. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, albeit very, very concerning. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it's clearer than ever that Scotland will now have suboptimal security and safety arrangements, and really the only way to ensure the safety of citizens is to rejoin these vital cross-border agencies by becoming an independent nation inside the EU?
Cabinet Secretary.
Shona Robinson is, of course, right. They are suboptimal arrangements. It does mean that it will take longer to possibly extradite somebody. It does mean that we have absolute loss to the SIS2 database, accessed millions of times by Police Scotland a year, which alerts Police Scotland to missing or wanted people. And the only way, in order to rectify that, of course, is for Scotland to take its EU membership up as an independent nation. Now, not just due to the important social and economic benefits, but of course it will afford us greater security cooperation with the rest of the EU.
Question 2, Alison Harris.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how many house parties police have been called on to disperse since the current COVID-19 lockdown was imposed.
Cabinet Secretary.
The latest available data shows that for the period of the 31st of December to the 6th of January, in relation to house gatherings, Police Scotland attended 565 gatherings. 343 of these were found to have breached restrictions. 240 fixed penalty notices were issued. 15 arrests were made, and Police Scotland regularly update that data on their website. We continue to work closely with Police Scotland on the provision of a weekly COVID-19 bulletin, which is published, as I say, on their website, and it summarises various areas of policing in relation to their enforcement during the pandemic.
Alison Harris.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? It's recognised by the Scottish Government that these house parties are a major source for spreading coronavirus, and that's why the police are being called upon to attend and disperse them. So could I ask why these very same police officers are not being prioritised to receive the COVID-19 vaccine when the Government is expecting them as part of their daily job to put themselves at even greater risk by attending and breaking up these house parties?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say to Alison Harris that every single one of us, regardless of whatever political party we belong to, I am certain, absolutely credits Police Scotland and the officers for the difficult job they do in normal circumstances, let alone the risk they put themselves in during the pandemic. I should say that the JCVI prioritisation in relation to the vaccine that we follow here in Scotland is, of course, the exact same prioritisation that is followed by the Conservative UK government and indeed by governments across other devolved nations, and that is of course prioritised in order so that the vaccine is received by those who are at most risk of either death or indeed serious illness. What I can give an absolute assurance to Alison Harris and indeed any police officers listening and indeed police staff is that when it comes to phase 2 of the vaccine, that of course the prioritisation of first responders, including Police Scotland, is very much at the forefront of our mind.
Before I move to question 6, Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you either to speak up or at some point raise the volume if you could? You're slightly quiet. Question 6, Alec Cole-Hamilton, please.
Sorry, to ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on Police Scotland's enforcement of the current COVID-19 restriction.
Cabinet Secretary.
I will try to both speak up, Presiding Officer, and also sit slightly closer to my tablet, so hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. As I have said in my previous answer, I do appreciate the hard work of Police Scotland throughout the pandemic, the professionalism they've shown. I regularly, in fact weekly, speak with the Chief Constable about enforcement of the COVID regulations. Enforcement of the restrictions is, of course, an operational matter for the Chief Constable and Police Scotland. And they've been clear that they will operate under the principle of policing by consent. They will also follow the 4 E's approach, whereby they will engage, explain, encourage, and then only enforce as a last resort to protect public health. But of course, they can accelerate to enforcement if they believe the circumstances warrant it. As you'll also be aware, John Scott QC was commissioned by Chief Constable and indeed the SPA to review Police Scotland's use of the new emergency powers to respond to the coronavirus outbreak, and that group will report directly to the SPA. The latest data on enforcement is available on the Police Scotland website.
Alec Cole-Hamilton, please.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. I'm interested in how information is now flowing in Public Health Scotland and Police Scotland, for example, around breaches of quarantine. Over the summer lull especially, experts were telling us that quarantine was routinely being breached. Systems were incapable of responding to these situations and that this was leading in turn to outbreaks. So what work has the Scottish Government done to establish the extent to which that contributed to the spread of the virus? And looking forward, what is the plan for travel restrictions and enforcement in the period after lockdown?
Cabinet Secretary.
Forgive me, I didn't hear all of Alex Cole-Hamilton's question. I think the majority of it is probably directed towards the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, who is leading on issues around international travel and indeed domestic travel. But there is, of course, a data sharing arrangement between Public Health Scotland and Police Scotland, whereby where public health officials are unable to reach somebody that they are trying to reach in relation to those who are quarantining or should be quarantining, then they can pass that data on to Police Scotland for enforcement. That was a protocol developed, or a memorandum of understanding developed between Public Health Scotland and Police Scotland. In addition, of course, Police Scotland have tools that they can use to enforce or indeed issue a fixed penalty notice if necessary in relation to any breaches of quarantine. My understanding is that again these figures are routinely published in relation to the follow-up, Police Scotland's follow-up in relation to international travel. But if there is further detail that Alex Cole-Hamilton requires, particularly around international travel, he may want to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport.
Question 3, Keith Brown.
As the Scottish Government, what guidance it produced regarding the provision of education in prisons under the current COVID-19 restrictions?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has produced guidance for colleges, universities and student accommodation providers during COVID-19, and on the 15th of January 2021 we published further guidance on arrangements for the current term. Whilst the guidance is not specific to prisons, education provision across the public prison estate is modelled on our further and higher education systems, and so this guidance acts as a guide for delivery within the prison community. I know that education, like all other aspects of the prison regime, has been impacted by the necessary restrictions that have been put in place to managing the challenges of COVID. There is no alternative to face-to-face learning within prisons, and at a time when the whole country is being asked to minimise all but absolutely essential interactions and travel, prison education has been temporarily suspended.
Pete Brown.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer? As he'll be aware, though, staff who provide learning across 13 prisons in Scotland are employed by Fife College and subcontracted by the Scottish Prison Service. As per guidance, the college has moved to remote learning. However, staff subcontracted to SPS their place of work, which can mean attending 3 different workplaces. Could the Cabinet Secretary clarify whether he believes this approach falls within the current restrictive guidance, and if so, why it's different to that guidance issued in March last year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said, the prison education has now been temporarily suspended. I understand that none of the staff who teach in prison learning centres have been in establishments since the 12th of January. However, I will double check that and confirm that with the member. For clarity, SPS have a contract with Fife College to provide education. However, management of staff is very much an issue for Fife College. He's right, stay-at-home regulations came into effect on the 5th of January 2021. They do place a duty on employers to take all reasonable steps to minimise the spread of coronavirus. Again, the member would be welcome to raise these issues specifically and directly with SPS. They can provide you with more information. But as I say, my understanding is that from the 12th of January, Fife College advised their prison-based staff not to return to learning centres and prisons for the remainder of that week. On the Friday of that same week, Fife College took the decision to furlough their prison-based staff until the 12th of February. I understand they are reviewing that decision on the 31st of January. Fife College intend to bring their staff back from furlough at the earliest opportunity.
And taking 2 brief supplementaries, the word is brief. Liam MacArthur, followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The number of people awaiting trial in Scottish prisons has doubled since April last year, yet those on remand can't access education programmes and often have little time out of their cells. What purposeful activity is currently on offer to those sitting in Scottish jails on remand, and what is the Cabinet Secretary doing to help reduce the ballooning remand population?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in COVID, and frankly with the current restrictions, that is very, very limited. SPS are doing what they can within the restrictions to allow some element of purposeful activity, but public health will, of course, always be our #1 priority. I'm happy to provide the member, or to ask SPS to provide the member with a fuller answer in relation to purposeful activity. And on the rising prison population, again, I'm more than happy to write to the member in fuller detail about all the steps we're taking, be it on remand, be it for those prisoners that have been sentenced. But he and I share an absolute concern that the prison population in Scotland is too high, and we are taking detailed measures to ensure that we can reduce that prison population in good time.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given some prisoners have been released early on licence, it's unlikely that they'll have had full access to pre-release support. Can I ask what support will be available in the community for them and for those who have community disposals to ensure they get the support required to address their offending behaviour and to rebuild their lives as part of the community?
This is drifting a little off education in prisons, Cabinet Secretary, but if you feel free, just go for it.
No, I'm happy to answer because it is an important point that's raised by Rhoda Grant. We do fund third sector organisations that help with prisoner integration upon their release, such as the WISE Group, such as SACRO, for example, and the Shine PSP that work with the female offending population. That being said, I'm keen for SPS to re-establish their Tamu Care Officer support, which was suspended when the prison population rose last year quite significantly. So again, if the member wishes, she can write to me or indeed SPS directly, and we can give her further detail on what support we can provide prisoners upon release from prison.
Thank you. Question 4, Joanne Lamont.
To ask the Scottish Government what involvement the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and his officials had in the development of the draft guidance on collecting data on sex and gender.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Sex and Gender in Data Working Group is led by and indeed reports to Scotland's Chief Statistician. The draft guidance has been developed by the Chief Statistician in consultation with members of the working group and engagement with stakeholders. The work of this group is transparent, and details of group membership as well as papers and minutes are published online. Membership relevant to the Justice portfolio includes an official from the Scottish Government Family Law Unit, as well as representatives from the Scottish Prison Service and Police Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Thank you. To be aware, violent crime, assault and domestic abuse are overwhelmingly male and the victims overwhelmingly female. Given the recognised approach of prevention through education, protection through legislation and provision through support for women victims, how can the Scottish Government measure the scale of offending by men and any success in tackling this behaviour without collecting data on the sex of the offender? Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that it matters to record whether a rapist is male?
Cabinet Secretary.
I may have just missed the very end of Ms Lamont's question, but I think it was about recording of rape. And again, I will correct the record.
It was about recording the gender, whether male or female, committing the rape. I think that's correct, is it?
Yes. I believe that was the question, and I'm happy to correct the record if I am incorrect. But my understanding is that, of course, there are where Police Scotland may well record in relation to somebody's gender. There are exceptions to that, and rape would be one of those exceptions, where somebody is recorded by their biological sex. And of course, there are certain elements to the offence of rape which of course can only be carried out by those who are either born male or indeed post-operation trans male. So I will double check that, and I will clarify with the member on the broader point that she raises. She is absolutely right, of course. Domestic abuse is largely a crime committed by men towards female victims. The data as it is currently gathered, of course, bears that out. The draft guidance, although it says it is up to organisations to decide to record whether it is gender or indeed sex, there are, of course, exceptions that organisations can make depending on the circumstances. So that draft guidance is, as I say, draft guidance. There is stakeholder responses that are still being made to this, and I would encourage Joanne Lamont, if she has not already done so, to respond to the Chief Statistician to give her views on this.
If I could perhaps have shorter answers, please. I know it's very important, but I've got 3 more questioners. Question 5, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the decision by the Lord President to reduce the number of criminal trials, what further support it will provide to victims.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we have provided additional funding of £5.75 million to support organisations providing frontline services to those experiencing violence or domestic abuse. That is on top of the annual budget of £18.7 million to support victims, £12 million to tackle violence against women and girls. And we've also increased our budget to provide compensation for victims of violent crime to over £21 million. All in all, that is £57.5 million in funding provided to support victims and to support those organisations that help victims. Although the Lord President's decision was a difficult one, I think it is the correct one in relation to public health. I have spoken to Victim Support Scotland about that decision, have further meetings lined up.
It's Liam Chair.
And have a number
John Mason, please. Sorry. Had you finished?
Not quite. Just to say that I have a number of meetings up with a number of other victim support organisations to address this issue.
Thank you, John Mason.
Yeah, thank the Justice Secretary for that answer. I think many of us feel that the justice system is very slow at the best of times, and with these delays, it means that witnesses forget what happened in an incident, and victims do feel let down. Is there any way of speeding up the justice system?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can confirm to the member that very active conversations are taking place with the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, with the legal profession, with victims' organisations, and indeed between me and the Finance Secretary around tackling the court backlog. If we can tackle that court backlog, and of course we have funded the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service for external jury centres which has seen court capacity in the High Court and indeed will see in the Sheriff Court back to pre-COVID levels, that is the best thing we can do, is to help to fund and tackle that backlog. So, of course, the budget will be announced next week. I wouldn't want to preempt that, but certainly this is part of the consideration being given by the Finance Secretary to tackle that backlog so that victims don't have to wait so long for their case to come to court.
Brief supplementary, Liam Kerr.
Yeah, I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. In September last year, the first instalment of the Victim Surcharge Fund would open by the end of 2020, but we know that it won't pay out a penny until March 21. Furthermore, the reduction in criminal trials means even less money going into that fund. So what is the SNP going to do to mitigate the impact on the Victim Surcharge Fund of the SNP's delays to the scheme and a reduction in court trials?
I hope you heard that, Cabinet Secretary. It was a bit strange at the beginning.
Yes, I got the general gist of it. First of all, I'm pleased that Liam Kerr mentions the groundbreaking victim surcharge that the SNP Scottish Government has brought in. It will make a real tangible difference to victims right across the board. He'll forgive me, in the midst of a global pandemic, there may well be a few weeks of delay to certain matters, but it has been no more than that. Of course, there has been an impact by the reduction of court cases due to COVID. And of course, the Victim Surcharge Fund will be open to victims, and I'm delighted that victims right across the board and right across Scotland will have the ability to receive further support from the Scottish Government due to our groundbreaking Victim Surcharge Fund.
Question 7, Mark Ruskell.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the rollout of providing naloxone for frontline police officers to respond to suspected overdoses.
Cabinet Secretary.
Police Scotland announced in November that the Chief Constable had approved proposals for a test of change for police officers to carry intranasal naloxone spray. The test of change will take place in 3 test bed areas in Falkirk, Dundee City and Glasgow East. Approximately 700 officers will be trained across the 3 areas and will be eligible to carry naloxone, with training expected to commence very shortly in spring of this year. This will be the largest test of change of police carrying naloxone in the UK to date, and the programme will be delivered in collaboration with a number of key partners and agencies and with significant support from the Scottish Drugs Death Task Force. It's anticipated that the test of change will provide a strong evidence base to help inform policies around the police carriage of naloxone in Scotland, and the Scottish Government fully supports this initiative and look forward to support a full rollout across Police Scotland following positive results that we expect that these pilots will deliver.
Mark Ruskell.
Can I thank Cabinet Secretary for that detail of the pilots? The Minister for Drugs Policy, though, recently announced that take-home naloxone kits will be given to people at high risk accidental overdoses to urgently save lives. So can the Cabinet Secretary explain why there's been a more cautious approach adopted by Police Scotland, with only very limited trials taking place in certain areas on a voluntary basis? When can we expect to roll out across the whole of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
I wouldn't agree with Mark Ruskell's characterisation. I have spoken to the Chief Constable about this issue, his senior force executive team, and they are very enthusiastic about doing everything they can within their powers to help reduce drugs deaths right across Scotland. I think it's a bold initiative. It is, of course, as I say, the largest test of change of its kind in relation to the carriage of naloxone anywhere in the UK. But I hope the member will appreciate that it is important to gather evidence of how that carriage is hopefully saving lives. And of course, there are issues and concerns that have been raised by the likes of the Scottish Police Federation. So it is important that we continue to work with staff unions and indeed staff associations so that we get them on board. But I expect positive results after this test of change, and if the results are as positive as I expect them to be, then hopefully we can begin a full rollout thereafter.
And just managed to squeeze in question 8. Graham Simpson.
Thank you very much. To ask the Scottish Government for its response to the Scottish Prison Services annual report for 2019-20.
Cabinet Secretary.
I welcome the publication of the annual report. It recognises the achievements made by our prison service in 2019-20, but also, of course, some of the challenges they face. As I've said before, I'm very grateful for all staff for their hard work and dedication, particularly during these unprecedented times. The significant challenges being faced across our prisons, particularly in relation to the population, do continue. The impact of COVID has seen a decrease in the population when compared to the figures highlighted in the annual report. However, I'm very frank, Scotland's prison population is far too high, but it is also changing in terms of its complexity, illustrated by the increasing number sent to prison with a history of sexual offending, organised crime and violence, and increasing numbers of older people. So I regularly meet with the Interim Chief Executive of the SPS, and I'm fully aware of all the issues reported, and together the Scottish Government, SPS and Justice Partners are working together to address some of these challenges.
Thank you. Brief supplementary, brief answer, please.
Yes, thanks for that answer. Just a quick question about drug use in prison. Because when the SNP first came to power, there were 209 drug incidents in prison. The latest report shows the figures risen to just over 2,000. So can the Cabinet Secretary say why he thinks that is and what he's doing about it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in brief, the methods of detection for drugs and illicit substances in our prisons has got a lot better over the last decade, or indeed even over the last 13, almost 14 years that the SNP have been in power. So we continue to invest in technology. Rapiscan machines are an example of that. And so we will continue to do that. But on the general point, I would say that I am very concerned about the continued presence of drugs and illicit substances within our prisons. So we work with our justice partners, with SPS. If there's further investment in technology that is needed, then we are obviously happy to consider that as part of the ongoing budget process.
Thank you. That concludes questions on justice and law officers, and it's time to move on to the next item of business.